Hello, my friends. My name is Darren Gerdes. It is Thursday, December 12th, 2024, and these are three big stories. And I'm only going to talk about really three big, well, at the end, the fourth, but really three big stories. Okay, so I keep talking about Syria, but Syria is not just about Syria. It's really as much about Russia. I showed you this image in the previous video of Syrians standing on Putin's portrait and that sort of thing. And yeah, I mean, it is about Russia as much as it is about Syria. Here, this is a Syrian at the Russian embassy in London spoke out against the occupation. The protesters called on the Kremlin to pay attention to their words. Quote, Syria has been liberated and Ukraine will also become free. Yeah, I mean, it's about what's happening to Russia. Okay, it's incredible. This is Jay in Kyiv saying it's incredible how much human suffering can be ended by merely taking Russians out of a place. That's an interesting thought. He talks about T, the other T, not the first T that I always try to avoid, but T, death camps, narcotics factories, underground prisons. Assad had it all. Yeah, he was a bad guy. I talked about this the other day, but it's worth going over again. Ukrainian intelligence sent about 20 experienced drone operators and about 150 first-person view drones to help the rebel headquarters in Idlib, Syria, 4 to 5 weeks ago to help HTS. And I thought about this and it just struck me. I put this meme out here the other day and it said, new offensive against the Russians will be in an unexpected location. Where? Near Aleppo. Well, I was joking about that, but that actually, like, think about the effect of what this had on Russia. This was possibly more damaging than the Kursk invasion to Russia. Like, they're losing their ability to project power and force. They're getting a black eye. They're losing prestige in the international community, as well as a huge stream of revenue because of losing these bases potentially in Syria. And they looked like they were supporting a bad guy, which they were. And this really was a new offensive against Russia in an unexpected location. And I'm not showing this to show you that, see, I predicted it, but to show you, like, in spite of how I was joking about it, like, this is actually what happened to Russia. I'm as surprised by it as you are. Now let's look at what the after effects are going to be. So, for example, Tendar says this, the fall of the pro-Russian Assad regime is a monumental defeat for Moscow. I think he's right. The Syrian energy corridor. For decades, countries in the Middle East have been pursuing the objective to establish a natural gas pipeline to Europe, one of the most lucrative markets in the world. Until 2022, Russia was a dominating seller of natural gas and established a series of pipelines such as Nord Stream. Now, the Trans-Anatolian gas pipeline connecting Azerbaijan to Europe while going through Turkey was in this region the only competitor and gained some market share ever since Russia launched a full-scale war in Ukraine. But with 16 billion cubic meters per year, it remained rather small. Now, Qatar has been pushing this project for a long time and followed two possible scenarios. So, variant 1 goes from Qatar to Saudi Arabia to Kuwait to Iraq to Turkey, or variant 2, Qatar to Saudi Arabia to Syria to Turkey. Both proposals had obstacles, but now variant 2 seems to be the more viable one. But it had one obstacle, and that was Syria, the Assad government. Now, Syria under Assad had been a staunch ally of Russia and naturally had no inclination to oppose its handlers in Moscow, even though it would have been lucrative to Syria and therefore to Assad. Now, that's a really interesting thought. But Moscow's influence was too strong, and in the late 2000s, the project was effectively shot down. After this weekend, that's changed. Assad is gone. Syria is under control of the rebels, who have good relations with Qatar. It does not take too much guessing to assume whether Qatar will renew its efforts. Probably will. And if they do, it changes the dynamic even more significantly for Russia. Now, Andrea Strichter, Deputy Director and Research Fellow, Non-Proliferation and Biodefense Program, said that Jerusalem acted swiftly and wisely by destroying Syria's chemical weapon stocks. Washington must now ensure that HTS lets international inspectors finish the job. Now, again, Israel's just been pummeling Syrian military capacity. The ships that it sank yesterday, the 250 rocket attacks the day after the 150 rocket attacks, they've been taking out all of Syria's capacity as much as humanly possible. Now, one of the problems is that the rebels didn't get along with each other, but they all hated the government. But the Kurds are signaling a difference now. The Kurdish administration in northeast Syria orders raising the Syrian opposition flag across all institutions, saying that this flag embodies the hope of Syrian people for freedom and dignity and national unity. So Syria might have a fighting chance if they can all start to figure out how to get along. Darth Putin says, on day 1022 of my 3-day war, I looked into Assad's eyes and I saw my future. I remain a master strategist. All right, let's turn our attention to big story number 2. The Russian economy is hurting. So Chuck Farrer posted this. How's the economy? My Kyiv Post colleague, Jason Smart, updates on the value of Putin's ruble. It's worth less than 1 cent. Now, it's been like that for a little while. Here is a 107, and Jason J. Smart posted this. It was at 108 at a different point in the day. In the past 3 hours, between 10 a.m. and 1300 Moscow time, the ruble lost 6% of its value. The ruble is not sustainable. Russia cannot win in Ukraine, nor back Assad. The military is not sustainable. Russia isn't sustainable. It'll collapse. Now, it will collapse. We really don't know if or when or how it would collapse, but the ruble is at 104.25. So it was dropping down, and then there was a sharp turn at the beginning of the week, and now it's at 104.25. But unless something changes in the economy, its days don't seem bright. Now, speaking of the economy, Russia's housing collapse metastasizes to the consumer goods sector. Russia's largest furniture manufacturer calls for immediate government intervention. Quote, we risk seeing closure of dozens of factories and thousands of job losses in the coming months, unquote. Well, why? Well, because there's this effect, like housing has a multiplier effect. Automobiles have a multiplier effect. If you buy one, you're buying all these other peripheral things around it as well. And furniture is one of those things that's peripheral to housing. So if there's a housing slowdown, furniture may also slow down. Jay in Kyiv explains that the most interest rate sensitive sectors of the Russian economy are already imploding, but now it's coming for everything else. First, it was the property developers, then the overall housing sector, then materials. Now the biggest furniture manufacturer is demanding a government bailout. It's all just getting started. And yeah, I mean, it's going to get worse unless they take some significant corrective action. And I'm not sure how they can wage the war in Ukraine and simultaneously take corrective action. Okay, Anton Gerashenko talks about it from a number of different angles. There's a growing tension among Russia's elite over the growing cost of sanctions to the Russian economy, according to the Washington Post. The central bank is raising interest rates to combat rampant inflation caused by sanctions, and Putin's military spending could bring the economy to a standstill. There's a wave of bankruptcies that's possible, including Russia's strategically important military industry. Russia will no longer be able to replenish the equipment being lost on the battlefield. Well, what they'll do is they'll just print more money, and then that'll cause great inflation, and then you'll have a whole different problem set. But we can talk about that another time. New U.S. sanctions imposed on 50 Russian banks, including Gazprom Bank, increased transaction costs for Russian importers and exporters. Contractors in the Russian defense industry report non-payments and rising financial costs. Key machine building industries could collapse. Russian news agency Interfax reported on December 3rd that non-payments are spreading throughout the economy. Large and medium-sized enterprises delayed 19% of payments from July through September. Small enterprises delayed 25% of payments over the same period. So they're in bad shape. Now, how are they going to get out of this? Well, one way is that Zimbabwe has announced plans to send its first astronaut into orbit, according to the Director General of the country's National Geospatial and Space Agency. Quote, we expect that with the help of our Russian colleagues, we will be able to launch our own rocket into space within 10 years, unquote. Now, that's going to be a bad move for Zimbabwe. It's not the poorest country in Africa, but it's a very poor country in Africa. In 2020 alone, the Zimbabwe currency lost a third of its value against the dollar, while hyperinflation and high unemployment rates continue to exacerbate the crisis. And the Russians, who would have been dealing with the Zimbabweans, perhaps, just lost their gateway to Africa through Syria and have to find another means of being able to get there and back. And that's going to create headaches for this potential program. All right, let's turn to American politics. Time magazine just named Trump Person of the Year. Now, he didn't actually do anything except win the election. Now, in his defense, that was overcoming some significant odds. Now, personally, I would prefer to see him become Time Man of the Year next year by arming Ukraine to help Ukraine push the Russians out and create a lasting and just peace through those means. But it's not looking that good when the future FBI director nominee, Kash Patel, talks about how he's going to investigate Zelensky's activities. Now, Patel aims to probe how U.S. taxpayer money has been used by Ukraine. I can tell you it's been used to create 750,000 casualties and bomb Russia. The Congress has oversight of this already, so I don't mind that he's going to investigate, and he's going to be caught up doing all kinds of domestic things, so he's not going to be that big of a threat, but it's unfortunate that he feels like he needs to say this before his confirmation. Xinpiao Zhao, 39, of Brentwood, California, was arrested today on federal criminal complaint for allegedly flying a drone over and taking photographs of Vandenberg Space Force Base. So that's problematic, and this is the kind of thing that Patel should be spending his time on when he gets into the FBI. But as for Trump, what is he actually going to do? The signals that Trump has been sending have been more positive than negative. According to Time magazine, when pressed on whether or not he would abandon Ukraine, Trump says he would use U.S. support for Ukraine as leverage against Russia in negotiating an end to the war. Quote, "I want to reach an agreement, and the only way you're going to reach an agreement is not to abandon." Unquote. So that's positive. We just got to keep Donald Trump Jr. from posting more stupid stuff like this. You remember Zelensky was Time Person of the Year a year or two ago, and here's Donald Trump as Person of the Year. I want Trump to earn it by helping Zelensky kick the Russians out of Russia. Okay, for my last story, a number of you have contacted me about Joe Blogs, and he was hacked a second time. So as soon as I heard about it, I reached out to him. I asked him what I could do to help. He said nothing at this time. Just make sure you secure everything because this is kind of a bad scene, what's happened to him. If you listen to his hacking update, he did get his channel restored, and that's good news. So he's starting everything over, and like he's buying a new computer, new phone, starting a new email address. Like he's starting from scratch so that this doesn't happen again. Thank you for alerting me. I did reach out to him, and he was just saying, like, make sure you lock it down and have backups of everything. So that's good advice. Word to the wise. All right, last little bit. It's almost Christmas, and the Hallmark researchers say that they are close to developing a second movie plot. Okay, my friends, that's all that I have for you today. Thank you for your time, the likes, the shares, and the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.